The storm had been raging for 3 days without pause. White winds howled across the frozen wasteland, carrying blades of ice that cut against exposed skin. Lieutenant Marcus Kane trudged forward through the deep snow, his boots sinking with each heavy step. His breath fogged in the freezing air, escaping in short bursts as his strength slowly drained away. He was alone. His squad had been scattered after their transport ship crashed into this barren planet. The last signal he received told him that most of his men were either dead or missing. Now Marcus carried only a half-empty pack, a rifle slung over his back, and the stubborn determination that had kept him alive through worse odds. The landscape around him was a graveyard of twisted metal. Shards of the broken transport were scattered across the ice fields, half buried in snow like the bones of some ancient beast. The sky was a dull gray, offering no warmth, no sun, no hope of direction. Marcus knew he had to find shelter before night fell again. The temperature dropped even further after sundown, and not even his armored jacket would be enough to keep him alive. He pressed on, leaning against the wind. His boot slipped across a patch of frozen glass-like ice, but he caught himself and kept moving. He had learned long ago that slowing down in conditions like these was an invitation to death. As he rounded the curve of a snow dune, something caught his eye. At first he thought it was another piece of wreckage, but as he stepped closer, brushing snow away with his gloved hand, he realized it was not metal at all. It was a body. Marcus froze, his instincts screaming. The figure was half buried in ice, its limbs trembling faintly, as though life still clung to it. With a cautious step, he leaned down and brushed more snow away. His heart skipped a beat. It was not human. The figure's skin was a pale lavender color, shimmering slightly under the frost. Long strands of silvery hair were plastered to her face. Her features were sharp, elegant, and unlike anything Marcus had seen up close before, though he had fought in wars where aliens filled the battlefield. She wore a suit of armor far different from his own, sleek and curved, more ceremonial than practical, and badly damaged. Her chest rose and fell shallowly. She was alive. Marcus hesitated. He knew this species, at least by reputation. The Thrylac Dominion, a people proud and powerful, rulers of many star systems and no friends to humanity. Their forces had clashed with human soldiers more than once, and their leaders often spoke of humans as primitive predators. Yet here she was. An alien girl, wounded, freezing, and moments away from death. Marcus pressed his lips into a hard line. His training screamed at him to leave her. Every survival guide said, conserve your strength. Help no one if it costs your life. But his conscience was louder. He crouched beside her, placing 2 fingers against her neck. A faint pulse. Weak but steady. Her body shivered uncontrollably. She was not built for cold like this. If he left her, she would not last an hour. Damn it, Marcus muttered to himself. He dug into his pack and pulled out his emergency thermal blanket. Carefully, he wrapped it around her body, tucking it against her shoulders. Her eyelids flickered, and slowly she opened her eyes. For a moment, Marcus thought he was staring into liquid silver. Her pupils were slit like a hawk's, but her eyes shone with intelligence and fear. Her lips moved, cracking as she tried to speak. The words came out in a language Marcus didn't fully understand, but the tone was sharp, defensive. She was telling him to stay away. I'm not your enemy, Marcus said firmly, though he wasn't sure if she understood. If I leave you here, you're dead. The alien girl tried to push his hands away weakly, her fingers brushing his jacket. She was trembling too hard to resist. Marcus could feel the heat draining from her body. He sighed and looked around. The storm was only growing stronger. They would both die if they stayed out here. He had to move her to better shelter. All right, Marcus muttered. Looks like we're doing this the hard way. With careful effort, he lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, her body frail compared to a human's build. She shivered violently against him, her armor clinking softly. Marcus trudged through the snow, carrying her toward a jagged silhouette in the distance. He had seen it earlier, a broken transport pod half buried in ice. It wasn't much, but it might provide walls against the storm. Step by step, he pushed forward, every muscle screaming. His breath burned in his lungs, but he refused to stop. By the time he reached the pod, his legs were shaking. He kicked the bent hatch open and staggered inside. The interior smelled of scorched metal and burned wiring, but it was intact enough to block the wind. Marcus lowered her gently onto the floor. She looked at him with narrowed eyes, her breathing shallow. She whispered something again in her tongue, her voice raspy. He couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. Why? Why are you helping me? Marcus knelt beside her and pulled a ration pack from his belt. He tore it open and held it toward her. She flinched at first, suspicious, then sniffed cautiously. Slowly, she took a bite. Her expression shifted, confusion, surprise, then reluctant acceptance. That's right, Marcus said quietly. Not poison. Just food. He leaned back against the wall, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. The storm pounded outside, the wind screaming against the broken metal. Inside it was cold but survivable. For a long time they sat in silence. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him, as though studying every move he made. Marcus pretended not to notice. He had been stared at before, by enemies, by allies, even by strangers who didn't know what to make of a soldier who kept surviving when others didn't. When she finished eating, she shivered again and tried to curl up tighter. Marcus frowned. The thermal blanket wasn't enough. Her species needed more warmth than this. He pulled off his armored jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Immediately she stiffened, her eyes flashing with alarm. She reached up, fingers clutching the jacket as though unsure if it was a trick. It's yours, Marcus said. You need it more than I do. She hesitated. Then, with surprising strength, she tugged the jacket tighter around herself, almost ripping it from his grasp. Marcus let out a short laugh. Fine, fine. Keep it. For the first time, a flicker of expression crossed her face. Not anger, not fear. Something closer to disbelief. Marcus leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. He was exhausted. The storm outside howled like a living beast, but inside, there was only the sound of her quiet breathing and the occasional rattle of broken metal. Tomorrow they would need to move again. He didn't know who she was, why she was here, or whether she would turn on him the moment she recovered. But for tonight, they were two stranded survivors sharing the same fragile shelter. Marcus woke to the sound of metal creaking under the weight of heavy ice pressing against the broken pod. His body ached from exhaustion, but his instincts kept him alert. He glanced toward the alien girl lying across from him. She was still wrapped in his armored jacket. Her frail form curled tightly inside it like a wounded bird. Her breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of her chest slow and uneven. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, no longer lavender but pale, almost gray. Marcus frowned. She was getting worse. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small scanner. The device hummed softly, projecting a faint readout. He didn't know much about three-lac biology, but even without proper data, the numbers told him enough. Her body temperature was dropping fast. Damn it, he whispered. He pressed his hand against her forehead. Ice cold. Too cold. If she kept losing heat, she would slip into unconsciousness and never wake up. Her eyes flickered open suddenly. Silver irises locked on his, sharp and alert despite her weakness. She said something in her language. Words he couldn't understand, but her tone was urgent, almost desperate. I don't know what you're saying, Marcus said quietly, but I get the point. You're freezing. The girl's hand weakly tugged at the jacket, holding it tighter around herself. Her claws scratched lightly at the fabric as though she feared he would take it back. Marcus gave her a small shake of his head. Relax. I'm not here to steal it from you. But the truth was harsher. Without that jacket, Marcus himself would not last long either. The storm outside was merciless, and the pod was barely warm enough to prevent frostbite. He could already feel the cold biting at his exposed arms and chest. His breath came out in thick clouds. His body shivered despite his training to control it. Still, he didn't reach for the jacket. Not when she needed it more. Hours passed. The storm outside grew louder, pounding against the wreck like a hammer. Snowflakes drifted in through cracks in the walls, dusting the floor with white. Marcus tried to fix a small heating unit he had found in the corner, but its wires were burned beyond repair. The alien girl watched him with half-lidded eyes. Her breaths came faster now, ragged and uneven. Suddenly, she began to shake violently, her body convulsing. Marcus dropped the useless machine and rushed to her side. Hey, stay with me! Her hands clawed at the jacket, pulling it closer, her sharp nails tearing small holes in the fabric. Marcus tried to calm her, speaking slowly and firmly. You're safe. Just breathe, focus, but she wasn't listening. In a sudden burst of strength, she pushed him away, her movements wild. Her eyes blazed with animal fear, as if she believed he was the enemy stealing her last hope of survival. Then it happened. With one desperate motion, she ripped the jacket off his shoulders completely. dragging it across his body and clutching it to her chest. The tearing sound echoed in the pod as seams split and fabric stretched under her claws. Marcus stumbled back, stunned. His breath hitched as the cold slammed against him without the jacket's protection. The icy air bit into his skin immediately, sinking deep into his bones. "Seriously?" he muttered, his teeth already starting to chatter. The girl curled herself tightly in the jacket, her body trembling violently but finding some relief in the stolen warmth. Her eyes darted toward Marcus, still wild with distrust. For a long moment, neither moved. The storm roared outside, a savage drumbeat that matched the pounding of Marcus's heart. He stared at her, then let out a dry laugh. "Figures. Save an alien, and the thanks I get is losing my only coat." She flinched at his voice, blinking rapidly. Slowly, confusion replaced her panic. Her claws loosened their grip, though she still clutched the jacket. She whispered something, her tone softer this time. Almost apologetic, Marcus sighed. "Yeah, I get it. You don't trust me. Can't blame you." He hugged himself tightly, rubbing his arms to keep the blood flowing. He sat back down against the wall, forcing his body not to shake. Years of military training had taught him how to endure cold, hunger, and pain. But even training had limits. Minutes stretched into hours. The temperature dropped lower. Marcus's lips turned pale, his body trembling against his will. He knew he couldn't keep this up for long. Across from him, the alien girl watched him silently. Her eyes, once sharp with suspicion, now softened with something else. She saw his skin pale, his movement slowing. She realized what she had done. Her claws loosened from the jacket. For a moment she hesitated, torn between survival instinct and something new, something she didn't understand. Marcus noticed her hesitation and shook his head weakly. "Keep it, don't worry about me. You'll need it if we're both getting out of here alive." His voice cracked, weaker than before. He closed his eyes, focusing on steady breathing, forcing his mind to stay awake. The girl whispered again, her tone uncertain. She shifted closer, dragging the jacket halfway between them. Her trembling hands extended it slightly toward him as though offering to share. Marcus opened his eyes and blinked at her. Then a faint smile crossed his lips. "Well, look at that. Progress." They sat closer now. The jacket stretched awkwardly between them. Their shoulders brushed, and Marcus could feel the faint heat radiating from her body. Not much, but enough to make a difference. For the first time, the alien girl did not shrink away from him. Instead, she watched him quietly, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light. He spoke softly, more to keep himself awake than anything else. Back home, they'd never believe this. "Human soldier and Thrylac princess." He stopped, realizing he didn't actually know who she was. "Or whatever you are, sitting in the dark, sharing one torn-up coat." Her head tilted slightly at the sound of his words. She didn't understand all of it, but his tone carried meaning. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't threatening her. He was simply talking. For her people, humans were described as predators, beasts that survived by taking, by fighting, by devouring. But the man sitting beside her now was freezing, half wrapped in his own jacket, and yet he had still given it up for her. That was not a predator. That was something different, something she didn't have a word for. The night dragged on, but the two of them endured it together. Marcus stayed awake as long as he could, watching the walls shudder under the storm's fury. Every time the alien girl shivered, he shifted the jacket closer to her side. And every time his lips turned too pale, she nudged it back toward him. It was clumsy. It was awkward. But it was survival. At last, as dawn's faint light pushed through the cracks of the pod, the storm began to weaken. The wind slowed, the snow settled, and silence returned to the frozen wasteland. Marcus exhaled slowly, his breath shaky but relieved. They had made it through the night. The alien girl met his eyes. For the first time, she did not look away. Marcus gave her a tired grin. "Guess we're stuck with each other now." She blinked, then tightened the torn jacket around both of them. A gesture, a fragile sign of trust, and in that frozen silence, a strange alliance was born. The storm had finally passed. When Marcus opened his eyes, the pod was filled with a faint gray light leaking through the cracks in the broken walls. His body was stiff and every muscle ached from the long night. He groaned quietly as he sat up, brushing frost from his arms. Beside him, the alien girl was still curled under the torn jacket. Her breathing was steadier now. Her color had returned slightly, No longer gray, but the pale lavender he had first seen. She was alive. That was something. Marcus rubbed his hands together, trying to bring warmth back into his fingers. The air inside the pod was still freezing, but compared to the storm outside last night, it felt almost calm. He took a deep breath and pushed himself to his feet. The girl stirred at the sound of movement. Her silver eyes opened slowly, watching him with guarded curiosity. "Morning," Marcus said, though he doubted she understood. His voice was hoarse from the cold. She tilted her head, her hair falling across her face. Then she spoke softly in her language, a string of melodic syllables that he couldn't make sense of. Marcus raised his hands in a helpless gesture. "Yeah, I don't understand a word of that, but I get the idea. You're alive. That's a win." The girl's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at the jacket between them, then at Marcus. Slowly, as though making a decision, she pushed part of the fabric toward him. Marcus chuckled. "So now you're sharing. Good. We might just survive this after all." He took the edge of the jacket and pulled it over his shoulders. For the first time since meeting her, he noticed she wasn't pulling it away in suspicion. She was offering. That small gesture meant more than words. Marcus knelt and opened his pack. Inside were only 2 ration packs left and a half-empty water canister. Supplies were running low. He tore open one ration and handed it to her. "Breakfast. Not the best, but it'll keep us alive." She sniffed it cautiously, her nose wrinkling. Then, after a moment of hesitation, she took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly, as if surprised that it was edible. She ate in silence, glancing at Marcus every so often, as though trying to understand him. Marcus chewed his portion slowly, his mind already moving ahead. They couldn't stay here. The pod offered some shelter, but it was far too exposed. And if enemy drones were still hunting survivors, this would be the first place they searched. When he finished eating, he stood and walked to the cracked opening. The wasteland stretched out in all directions, endless fields of ice and broken wreckage. In the distance, jagged mountains cut against the horizon like teeth. Somewhere out there, he knew, was a comms beacon. If they reached it, they could signal for rescue. The girl followed his gaze. She whispered something under her breath, almost like a prayer. Marcus turned back to her. "Beacon," he said, pointing toward the mountains. He tapped his wrist, then made a gesture of speaking into a communicator. "Signal rescue." She blinked at him, studying the movement of his hands. Then, to his surprise, she repeated softly in halting English. "Res. Q." Marcus froze. His eyes widened. You speak some English?" The girl frowned as though searching her memory. She nodded slowly. "Little." Her voice was rough, her accent heavy, but the word was clear. Marcus let out a relieved laugh. "Well, that makes things a lot easier." She tilted her head again, watching him. Then she pressed her hand against her chest. Aria. Marcus repeated. "That's your name?" She nodded once. Marcus pointed to himself. "Marcus. Marcus," she echoed, the word strange on her tongue. For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other. A fragile bridge had been built between them. Names, a start of communication. It was enough. They left the pod soon after. Marcus adjusted the straps of his pack and slung his rifle across his back. The torn jacket was still wrapped around both of them, though awkwardly. Aria walked close, her steps unsteady at first, but growing stronger as they moved. The wind was calmer now, though still sharp against the skin. Snow crunched under their boots with each step. The sky above was a dull silver, heavy with clouds that promised more storms to come. For hours they trudged across the wasteland in silence. Every so often Marcus would glance at Aria. She walked with grace despite her injuries, her silver eyes scanning the horizon with sharp focus. Yet there was fragility in her movements, a weariness that reminded Marcus she was still recovering. At one point, Marcus stopped to let her rest. She sat on a broken piece of wreckage, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Marcus offered her water, which she accepted with a small nod. "Not easy out here, huh?" Marcus said softly. He didn't expect her to reply, but to his surprise, she spoke again. "Cold," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Marcus smiled faintly. "Yeah, cold." The word hung between them, simple yet shared. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley of twisted metal. The remains of ships and machines lay scattered below, half buried in snow. It looked quiet. Too quiet, Marcus narrowed his eyes. His soldier's instinct screamed at him. "Stay down," he whispered. Arya crouched beside him, following his gaze. She tilted her head, her keen eyes spotting movement before Marcus did. In the distance, dark shapes hovered above the wreckage, drones. Their metallic frames glinted under the weak light, scanning the valley with cold precision. Marcus cursed under his breath. Scavenger drones. They're sweeping for survivors. Arya's hands clenched tightly. She spoke in her own tongue, a word heavy with anger. Marcus didn't need translation to understand. The drones weren't hers. They belonged to the same enemies who had shot down her ship. "We go around," Marcus whispered. Too dangerous. But the valley was wide and the mountains lay beyond it. To reach the beacon, they had to cross. Arya shook her head firmly. She pointed to the far side of the valley, then at herself, then at Marcus. Her meaning was clear. "We go through." Marcus groaned. "I was afraid you'd say that." They waited until the drones drifted to the far side of the valley. Then, moving low and fast, they slipped down the ridge and into the maze of wreckage. Metal groaned under their weight, snow crunching softly as they moved. Marcus kept his rifle ready, his eyes scanning constantly. Arya moved beside him, silent and quick. For all her fragile appearance, she had the instincts of a survivor. She pointed out shifting shadows, guiding Marcus around traps of broken steel. But luck never lasted. A sharp metallic hum filled the air. Marcus froze. Above them, one of the drones pivoted, its red sensor lights locking on their position. "Run!" Marcus shouted. The drone fired a burst of energy, scorching the snow where they had stood. Marcus pulled Arya with him, sprinting through the wreckage as beams of light exploded around them. The sound of engines filled the valley as more drones turned their way. They ducked behind a shattered engine block, the metal glowing hot from the near misses. Arya pressed close against Marcus, her eyes wide with fear and fury. Marcus gritted his teeth. "No choice. We fight." He raised his rifle, aimed carefully, and fired. The first shot struck a drone, sending it spiraling into the snow. Sparks flew as it crashed, smoking. Arya let out a sharp cry and snatched up a jagged piece of metal. With surprising strength, she hurled it at another drone swooping low. The makeshift weapon struck its sensor, throwing it off course. Marcus finished it with a quick burst from his rifle. But more were coming. Red lights cut through the gray air as drones closed in from all sides. Marcus glanced at Arya. She met his eyes, her jaw set with determination. For the first time, Marcus realized they weren't just two survivors anymore. They were allies. "All right," he said, steadying his rifle. "Let's show them what we can do together." Arya gave a sharp nod. Side by side, human and alien prepared to fight for their lives. The valley seemed endless. Marcus and Arya pressed forward through the twisted wreckage, the cold biting deep into their bones. The sky overhead was heavy with clouds, and thin snow drifted down, dusting the broken metal around them. Every step was calculated. Every shadow could hide another threat. Marcus had learned something during the storm and the drone attack. Arya was no ordinary alien. Her movements were precise, her senses sharp. She could hear things he would miss, notice patterns he would overlook. Yet for all her strength and skill, she was still fragile. Human conditions were not her strength. And that cold, that endless fatigue, it was slowly wearing her down. "Stay close," Marcus said quietly, his rifle scanning the horizon. "I've got your back." She nodded, her silver eyes flicking around nervously. "Why, help me?" she asked in halting English, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus exhaled slowly, keeping his gaze forward. "Because someone has to. You're not a threat to me, and leaving someone to die when I can help. That's not who I am." Arya looked at him. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. Perhaps she didn't fully understand the human word for honor, for loyalty, but she could feel it. She could see it in his actions. The wreckage gave way to a narrow canyon. The walls of jagged metal rose on either side like teeth, funneling them forward. It was quieter here, but Marcus's instincts screamed danger. "They'll know we're coming," he muttered. "Be ready." Arya adjusted her footing. She didn't speak, but her posture told him she understood. They moved slowly, carefully, scanning the canyon floor for signs of drones or traps. Then it happened. From above, shadows dropped. Drones. More than before. Their red sensors glowed like tiny suns, sweeping the canyon in synchronized arcs. Marcus ducked instinctively, yanking Arya down behind a rusted hull. "Hold on," he whispered. The drones fired energy bursts, striking metal around them. Sparks flew and small fires ignited in the wreckage. The canyon shook from the blasts. Arya's body pressed against his, trembling from fear and cold. Marcus gritted his teeth. "We can't stay here, move!" He grabbed her hand and sprinted toward a pile of twisted machinery that offered cover. Arya followed without hesitation, trusting his lead. The snow underfoot turned into ice, making every step dangerous. A drone swooped low, firing directly at them. Marcus rolled, dragging Arya with him. The shot tore through the metal behind them, sending shards flying. Arya gasped, then clenched her fists, staring at the drone with a fierce intensity. Marcus looked at her. "You can't take it on alone. Stay low!" But Arya did not back down. She grabbed a jagged piece of metal from the ground, slinging it at the drone like a spear. It hit the drone's sensor, causing it to wobble and crash into the canyon wall. Sparks rained down. Marcus's jaw tightened in surprise. She had strength, skill, and instincts that defied her size. But there were more drones. Marcus knew their chances were slim if they continued like this. He scanned the area and spotted a narrow passage leading up the canyon wall. "That way!" he shouted. "Climb!" They scrambled over sharp metal and ice, struggling to gain height. The drones pursued, firing relentlessly. Each shot sent pieces of metal flying, and each burst of energy scorched the frozen ground. Arya's legs trembled. She was exhausted, her body shivering violently despite the torn jacket still wrapped around both of them. Marcus noticed, slowing his pace to match hers. "You can do this," he said firmly. "One step at a time." "I've got you." Her silver eyes met his. She didn't say a word, but she nodded. The trust in her gaze was faint but growing. Halfway up the canyon wall, they paused behind a large fallen ship. Marcus checked the drones. 2 were down, 1 circling, scanning. He pressed his hand against Arya's shoulder. "We need a plan," he said quietly. "We can't fight them all head-on, but we can use the canyon to our advantage." She studied him, her mind quick despite her exhaustion. Then she pointed to a pile of wreckage above the drone's path. It was unstable but could fall if triggered. Marcus smiled faintly. "You're thinking like a human soldier." "Good." Together they pushed and pulled, maneuvering heavy pieces of metal. Arya's strength was surprising. She lifted and shoved debris with precision and speed, while Marcus used leverage and timing to make it fall at the right moment. When the drone entered the kill zone, the wreckage collapsed. Metal and ice tumbled down, striking the drone. Sparks flew, then smoke, and the drone crashed with a deafening clang. Arya exhaled sharply, slumping against Marcus. "Too close," she whispered. Marcus patted her shoulder. "Yeah, but we made it." They continued upward, slowly gaining height. By the time the canyon widened, the drones had fallen back, either disabled or temporarily deterred. Marcus and Arya collapsed behind a boulder, catching their breath. She looked at him, eyes wide. "You protect me," she said simply. Marcus shook his head. "We protect each other. That's what survival is. You'd do the same for me if I were in your place." Arya blinked. She didn't argue. Perhaps she realized he was right. Humans survived not by running alone, but by staying together, by protecting even those who were strangers. The lesson was strange to her. Her people taught her to trust no one outside the Dominion. Humans, she had been told, were predators, loyal to none. And yet here was one man, freezing, wounded, and exhausted, keeping her alive despite the danger. It was something she had no word for. As they rested, Marcus checked her condition again. Her body temperature was returning to safer levels, but she was still weak. "We need to keep moving," he said. "The beacon isn't far, but we can't stop here long. More drones could come." Arya nodded and struggled to her feet. Marcus extended his hand, helping her steady herself. She grasped it, faintly shaking, then let him lead. They moved carefully, winding through the canyon, climbing higher, always alert. Marcus kept his rifle ready and Arya stayed close, scanning for threats. Hours passed and the landscape slowly changed. The canyon ended, opening into a frozen plateau. Snow stretched endlessly ahead, with jagged mountains rising in the distance. The beacon lay somewhere beyond those mountains. Marcus stopped, turning to her. "We're close, but this is the hardest part. The plateau is open and drones will see us from miles away. We need speed and cover." Arya's silver eyes narrowed. "We won't survive?" Marcus smiled faintly. "We survive. Together." Her lips pressed into a thin line, a mixture of determination and fear. Then she moved closer, brushing against him slightly as they adjusted the torn jacket. Marcus noticed the gesture but said nothing. Survival came first. The first drones appeared soon after. Red lights glowed in the distance, moving fast, scanning. Marcus took a deep breath. Keep low, move fast. Follow me. They sprinted across the snow, ducking behind jagged rocks and wreckage. Energy bursts struck near them, sending ice flying. Arya's heart pounded, but she ran without hesitation, keeping pace with Marcus. At one point, a drone dove directly at them. Marcus raised his rifle, firing rapidly. The shot struck true, but the blast sent snow and debris flying. Arya tumbled slightly, and Marcus caught her, steadying her as they ran. You okay? He asked, breathless. She nodded. Yes, thanks. You? Marcus gave a short laugh. You're welcome. Now let's finish this. Together, human and alien fought their way forward. Every step, every move was survival. And with each moment, Arya saw more clearly why humans were feared, and why in the right hands they were worthy of respect. They didn't give up, they protected those around them, and they fought even when hope seemed lost. For Arya, this was a revelation. For Marcus, it was just another day of keeping someone alive. But in this frozen wasteland, that day would change both of their lives forever. The plateau stretched endlessly before them, white and cold, with jagged mountains piercing the gray sky. The beacon Marcus and Arya sought was somewhere beyond those peaks, hidden from view by the snow and ice. The wind had calmed somewhat, but it still bit at their faces and hands, forcing them to keep moving to stay warm. Marcus led the way, rifle ready, boots crunching in the snow. Arya followed close, her steps uncertain but determined. The torn jacket they shared offered some warmth, though it was tattered and stretched awkwardly across their shoulders. She clutched it tightly, as though it were a shield against the cold and against fear. They had survived storms, drones, and exhaustion, but Marcus knew the final stretch would be the hardest. The open plateau offered no cover, and any movement could draw attention. Stay low, he whispered. Keep moving and don't look back. Arya nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. She had learned much from him over the past days. How to anticipate danger, how to conserve energy, how to act even when fear and pain threatened to stop her. She still did not fully understand humans, but she was beginning to see the truth. They were relentless, stubborn, and fiercely loyal to those they chose to protect. The first sign of trouble appeared as faint red lights glimmering on the snow ahead. Drones. They spotted us, Marcus muttered, crouching behind a jagged outcrop. His rifle was ready, fingers steady despite fatigue. Arya crouched beside him, breathing heavily. We fight? Marcus shook his head. Not yet. We move first. Fight only if we have no choice. The drones hovered above, scanning the plateau. Their sensors glowed bright red against the white snow. Marcus studied them carefully. There were 3, circling in a triangle pattern, synchronized and calculating. On my mark, he whispered. We run from rock to rock. Timing is everything. Arya's silver eyes locked on him. She nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. Words were not needed. Their survival depended on trust and timing. They darted across the snow, sprinting from one jagged rock to another, the drones following relentlessly. Energy bursts struck near them, sending snow and ice flying in sharp, freezing shards. Arya stumbled once, nearly falling. Marcus caught her quickly, gripping her shoulder. You okay? He asked, breathless. Yes, she replied, her voice trembling but firm. Go. Together they continued, ducking, sprinting, and sliding across icy patches. Marcus fired at drones that ventured too close, each shot careful and precise. Arya began to follow his movements, understanding instinctively when to run, when to hide, and when to strike. The beacon lay closer now, a faint glow at the edge of the plateau. But between them and safety, a line of drones had appeared, their numbers doubling. Marcus swore quietly. They had been surrounded, Arya, he said urgently, grabbing her hand. We're going to do this together. Stay close, trust me, and follow my lead. She nodded, clutching the torn jacket around both of them. It had been her lifeline, his gift, and now it was their shared shield. Marcus raised his rifle, aiming at the closest drone. Cover me! He shouted. Arya did not hesitate. Using a piece of metal torn from a wreck, she hurled it at a drone swooping down. It struck true, disabling the sensor array. Sparks flew and the drone spiraled into the snow. Marcus fired at another, striking its fuel cell. The explosion sent a shockwave across the snow, knocking him and Arya backward. The jacket shifted slightly, but Arya held it close, protecting them both. They sprinted again, reaching the beacon at last. Marcus pressed the activation panel, praying the old device still worked. A faint hum filled the air, then a strong light flared, sending a signal across the planet. The drones were closing in fast, but the beacon's signal attracted attention. Rescue ships on the horizon, human ships cutting through the storm clouds. Marcus turned to Arya, breathing heavily, frost forming on his hair and jacket. "We did it. The signal's out. Help is coming." Arya looked at him, eyes wide. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, still shivering from exhaustion but steadying. She glanced down at the torn jacket, then back at Marcus. For a long moment she said nothing. Finally she spoke, her voice low and uncertain. "You'd saved me." Marcus shook his head. "We saved each other. That's how humans survive. We don't leave anyone behind if we can help it." Her silver eyes glistened with something Marcus did not recognize at first. Gratitude, awe, and maybe something deeper. She pressed her hand against the jacket, now tattered and torn, and whispered, "This, your gift, it saved me." Marcus smiled faintly, exhausted but relieved. "Not the jacket. You survived because you didn't give up, but yeah, the jacket helped." The rescue ships descended, hovering above the plateau. Ropes and ladders dropped, and Marcus helped Arya climb aboard. She hesitated, glancing back at the torn jacket that had been their shared lifeline. Marcus saw her hesitation and said, "Take it with you. Let it remind you. Humans can be different than you've been told. We can be protectors, not predators." Arya touched the jacket one last time, then allowed herself to be lifted onto the ship. She sat beside Marcus, still shivering, still exhausted, but alive. For the first time in days, she felt safe. The ship rose above the plateau, the drones below scattering at the approach of the human vessels. Marcus looked down at the frozen wasteland, thinking about the nights spent in cold, the dangers they had faced, and the small choices that had kept them alive. Arya turned to him, silver eyes meeting his. "Humans, not what we thought," she said quietly. Marcus shrugged. "We're not perfect, but we try, and sometimes that makes all the difference." As the ship left the planet's surface, Arya wrapped the torn jacket more tightly around herself. For her, it was no longer just fabric. It was a symbol of survival, of trust, of a human spirit that refused to abandon someone in need. Marcus watched her, smiling faintly. She was learning what he had known all along. Strength was not just in firepower or speed, but in loyalty, courage, and the stubborn will to protect others. And somewhere in the vastness of space, Arya knew she would carry this lesson forever. Humans were strange, unpredictable, and sometimes reckless, but they were also capable of inspiring loyalty and trust in ways no one else could. For Marcus, it was just another day in the life of a soldier. For Arya, it was a revelation that would change her people's view of humanity. The ship soared higher, leaving the frozen planet behind. Snow drifted across the plains below, glinting in the weak sunlight. The torn jacket lay across both of them, a small bridge between two species that had only just begun to understand each other. Arya's voice broke the silence, soft but certain. "I will tell them. Humans, not monsters, protectors." Marcus chuckled softly. "Sounds like a good start." For a long while they sat in quiet understanding, watching the horizon. The war, the storm, the drones, they were behind them now. Ahead was safety, and perhaps the beginning of a new trust between humans and Thrylak.